It's a pleasure to be here. So it's my first time in Hanover, and so I'm very happy to be here to talk about. This pretty broad, very timely, I think, topic of artificial intelligence, human artificial intelligence. I'll try to explain what I mean by that. And the intersection of this new field and social resilience, and I really appreciated the previous presentation. I like history a lot, and I think that we can see all the intersections, different disciplines, coming into this new age. So. So you see the title, it's pretty ambitious. So that's why I added thoughts on human artificial intelligence for societal resilience. Hopefully I'll try to, I'll be able to get across some key messages and maybe change some thinking, and then we can have a discussion. So yes, I arrived this morning from New York. So I looked up online and basically boiled the ocean to come here. So I created 2.2 tons of CO2. So one of the questions is, is it worth it? You will see in 15 minutes. But so you have those kinds of questions, to what extent do you have to still travel? And it sounds a bit crazy that we travel across the world for conferences, and does the benefit outweigh the costs? Here you can actually pay 53 euros to offset. But if you look into how you offset, you fund projects. So you can say, well, you fund more stuff. But at least you have some data. So I think it's part of this recognition that we live in the more and more data-driven world. So the question, can we tech and talk our way out of this mess that is climate change in particular, that we in large part have created? And so this takes place in a context. I'm just going to put it up just a tiny bit, in a context of the data revolution. So I won't spend too much time discussing the data revolution. You're all familiar with it, the fact that we create more and more data than ever before, and all the questions and controversies around it, questions of fairness, of biases, of imbalance of power, of the Orwellian futures, and all the questions. Okay, what do we do with it? Is it the end of the world? Is it the best thing that's ever happened? The same questions that have happened with previous technologies, but there's a sense that history is getting faster and faster, and so we don't really know what to do. And so, in particular, this is one of the papers that we wrote recently, on human artificial intelligence for human development. So I will get to that in the second third of the presentation in about 5 minutes. To try to explain what is this vision for a human artificial intelligence for development and for, in particular, societal resilience. So we talked about cartoons. So here is a cartoon. So that's a cartoon on the right-hand side that I did not 10 years ago, but I think 9 years ago now, when there was this common phrase about data being the new oil. So, and people still say that, and you can say, well, the analogy is not right because data is not a rivalrous good, and but I think it still has some merits because oil is very powerful. It's also very dirty. It brings corruption, imbalance of power. So I think the analogy is still quite telling, and you can tease a lot of things about, is data really the new oil? What does it mean? How can we get the most out of it without it becoming an extractive industry? And all of these questions. And also the fact that data is also pretty polluting. We'll talk about data centers and the cost of data centers. So I still think it's a pretty interesting analogy, and the cartoon is this good news or not? Is still, I think, relevant. And so this question or these questions at the intersection of big data, and we'll see now AI, and societal resilience or disaster resilience, climate change resilience are not very new, at least in the short history of the past 10 years. So 5 years ago, 4 years ago, we organized an event during COP21 in Paris, which is actually, so you see the team, climate change resilience in the age of data. So it was only 4 years ago, but it feels like a very long time ago. Like 4 years ago in this field is a very long time ago. And my perspective on these things has changed a lot since then. But as you see, so we've done some work, and you can see, you can download the report and find the the case studies that we looked at, how data could actually support, enhance disaster and climate change resilience. And so to give it a short gist, which I think is still relevant, so first of all, we said, okay, like resilience, things that are well known to those of you who work on resilience and societal resilience, but also in psychology. I mean, being resilient is not being strong, it's not being robust, it's not like resisting, it's adapting, it's being able to adapt and adjust, retaining function as external conditions change, and that's the basis of evolution, or that's the gist of evolution. And so I think this still is still relevant to really think in those terms, that that being resilient is actually about learning and about being able to adjust to changing conditions. And I will get back to that. Also, one thing that was interesting in this work from I'm talking 4 to 5 years ago, okay, and then we'll get more into. So I'm not talking sort of like an AI world. It's more like data and big data. So, well, first of all, we said, well, we live in human societies are complex systems, and so complex systems can change very rapidly from one equilibrium to another. So things can look like they're fine for a long time, and then all of a sudden, boom, like it's just like falls. We also looked at the whole, so like the whole spectrum of, the difference between hazard and disaster, and what was like resilience, which is the ability to sort of like survive, so to speak, when you're hit by shocks, so that they don't become disasters. Or that you can actually recover. And so we had this like taxonomy in the paper about the functions of big data being descriptive, prescriptive, predictive, and also discursive. And so we gave examples of ways in which data could actually enhance societal resilience by, you see those 4 or 5 categories, by monitoring hazards, assessing the resilience of natural systems, guiding disaster response in Haiti, for instance. So we gave sort of like examples. But so now we are in this world where people don't really talk about data or big data very much, but more about like AI. And so this is sort of like the second part of my presentation after this introductory contextualizing remarks. Okay, so what is really AI? What is it changing for our thinking and doing about those things? So I would say quickly, AI is actually very close to what was called like big data a couple of years ago. It's essentially sort of like machine learning, where you have computers that are able to ingest a very large amounts of data, and through algorithms, they are able to learn sort of like what works and what doesn't work. So here on the top left-hand side, you have a little comic strip that I did also like almost 10 years ago to explain how you could use machine learning to predict poverty from cell phone activity. And you just correlate, and you find the right recipe to correlate the way some communities show in cell phone data and their poverty level. And that's pretty basic, like machine learning, and it can be supervised, it can be unsupervised, but that's the gist of machine learning. And then you can do lots of things with it, of course. Now, so here we're at the Volkswagen Foundation, so I thought, of course, like driverless cars would be an interesting example. So how do these cars drive? I mean, they're not coded, they don't know the route like beforehand. They're coded to actually learn from data. So, and it's supervised because if they hit a tree, they're told wrong. That's the wrong outcome. You should not do that. If they run over a cop, they're told wrong. And they do that like millions and millions and millions and millions of times. And at some point, they understand what they should do. And likewise, to tell between a city and a beach. At first, the machine doesn't know what is a city or a beach. It's told right or wrong. So it's meant to achieve an objective, and through data and feedback loops, it becomes very good at actually doing sort of like the right thing. Okay? That's the, sort of like the gist. And so our question is, can we apply the same kind of principle, the same kind of vision to entire human societies? Meaning, it's not just about using AI in our daily lives, okay? It is thinking as if we were all in a giant human AI, as if societies were a giant AI, a bit like you're in the Matrix, where we would learn through feedback loops and through data. And it's sort of like what we do, like evolution is sort of like based on that. We learn that there are things that kill us, and we don't do them. And that there are some traits that are better than others. But then here, the sort of like the vision, the question, can we actually sort of like take this to another level where policies, where behaviors would be much more like data-driven or data or evidence-based? And what are the data infrastructure and the legal frameworks and the sort of like the political relationships that need to be in place for this kind of vision to take place? So that's the sort of like macro vision of what I call a human AI. And to be a bit more specific, it is so the phrase comes from so Alex Pentland at MIT, which is, so it's about an AI is able to reinforce kind of like the neurons that help it get the right result. Can we do that with human societies? And we sort of do that. If we see someone on a train hitting a child, usually we say, you should not do that. And it's not only a moral thing, it's because we know that the child then is going to be like really hurt, and that it could lead him or her to become very violent. So we have integrated these learnings, but what if we again took this to the like a more systematic level, and policies would be much more driven and grounded in evidence. And so again, this sort of like sounds like being more resilient in the traditional sense. It is about like learning. But here the difference is that we are causing, to the point of the conference, we as humans are causing a lot of like the changes in the climate. And I'm wondering, when are we going to learn? How are we going to learn like not to do some things that we are doing, such that we don't need to like adapt or just like over and over and over, that we can also take the problem at the root, so we can learn what is actually causing climate change, for example. So I need 5 more minutes. And so I think the gist, maybe one key takeaway, is that I think resilient societies are learning societies. They are societies that are able to learn. So you see pictures here. Some of the stuff that you see here, so this is where I've written, like looks crazy to us, like having pregnant women smoke. My mom used to smoke when I was, like in the 70s. We all drove without seat belts at the back of cars, etc. And today, some of this sounds crazy to us. And I think there are things that we do today, like single-use plastic, for instance, that will sound crazy to our children, and they will say, "Wow!" And you survived. But this is hard. This is hard because we don't have the right data access. We don't have access to the right data, which are controlled by private companies. We don't have the right data culture. We don't have the right data systems to do that. There are very strong incentives from, just think of the politics. Think of the politics in the US. Think of the politics in the UK and other places. There are lots of very strong like incentives for people in power not to have any evidence-based policies. So it's also like very hard. There are fake news. We drown in data. So we don't know what's right or wrong. Just in interest of time, I'm sort of like, going through we have seemingly lost the ability to talk without sort of like insulting each other online. If you've tried to have an argument with someone who disagrees with you on Twitter or Facebook, immediately you are either right or wrong. You are in a box, whether it's to talk about climate change or to talk about sexual harassment, or there's no sort of like, or we seem to be losing, and this is in part driven by technology. So here we see the sort of like Promethean kind of fire thing. There are those two forces at play, but I think there is a lot of good that can come from being inspired by AI and using AI. And one of the things I think is interesting is that, I don't want to go too much over time, so I really try to finish in 3 minutes, is that it's the fact that if we cannot agree on some facts, then this notion of a human AI cannot function. Like we cannot agree on facts, we cannot discuss, we cannot come to a compromise if we disagree on some fundamental facts. And facts don't change our mind. You can tell people in the middle of the US, climate change is real. It is caused by humans. You can hammer facts, and if you tell them you are dumb if you don't believe in that, this is not the way to do it. Like, this is not going to change their mind. So there's also something very human about this vision that we have to be able to learn as a giant sort of like human AI. And so also I talked about all the sides. I mean, data centers are also very energy hungry. They take a lot of electricity to cool down. So how much data are we going to share or store? How much data are we going to collect? These are like very hard questions. Also, the risks for privacy, paramount. All right, so I will close by giving you some just pointers of things that I think can help. First of all, I really believe it's a bit like intuitive, I think, for me right now still, but I really believe in this notion of like a human AI, trying to go towards that, trying to being inspired by the way AI works and its tools. So there is the OPAL, or Open Algorithms project, that we've been deploying in Colombia and Senegal for the past 2 years. And it's basically trying to put in place actual data architecture standards and systems and governance systems to do those kinds of things at scale. So we try, for instance, to ask questions to private sector data, to telephone operator data, and we try to extract population density almost in real time, for instance. And it's a question and answer mechanism. So we don't see the data. It's like anonymized or pseudonymized. But it's really, the underlying philosophy is, what if we knew better? What if people could ask questions to the data so that their behavior be more evidence informed? Now we're starting only with telecom operators, but the vision, and this has been shared and discussed at the European Commission level in Europe, and it's compliant with the GDPR, et cetera, is that we could do that with all private data that are there, like with bank data, with transportation data, with utility data. What if we could ask questions to these data sets to sort of feed this sort of like human AI vision? There's also a very interesting take on what are the governance standards to do that. So there is this idea of having data cooperatives, where we would pool our data the way we pool our money in banks, such that we can invest as societies, but here it would be we pool our data in sort of like credit unions so that we can collectively ask questions to know how our societies are doing, but to do that in a safe way. There's a big need for training, data literacy, so that people can actually, not just youth, but also like professionals can actually ask the right questions, can actually be aware of what is going on. That's so that we can debunk fake news, that we are better able at navigating this entirely new world. So those are some of the projects as DataPop that we're doing. So one project, so you can, hopefully the slides will be shared, but so we do a lot of research on these topics, from data sharing to actual like implementation, experimentation in developing countries, especially, but not only Latin America, and now increasingly Europe, because I will be moving to Europe next year. And so this is the final slide. So one good example, I think, is a project that we did recently where we try to incentivize people to change their behavior. Because at the end of the day, what matters is our ability to sort of like learn from what we're told and to change our behavior accordingly. So there are examples or initiatives around like carbon wallet, where we tell people this is your footprint, and so basically you should change your behavior. So it's both at the individual level, but also, and I think even more so at the collective societal level, that we have to, I think, be inspired by the way AI functions to meet some pre-agreed objectives, and then use the tools of AI to actually help us meet those objectives. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your talk. How do you engage everybody to define the objective function so that it's fair and equitable?
Yeah, I think throughout this conference we've had a lot of discussion about how important it is to sort of understand the system, and how the understanding of the system is key to resilience. And I think data can help with that, but I think we're also starting to see systems with millions of lines of code running the system. I'm just wondering, is there a flip side that actually we don't know what's going on anymore because of a lot of these technologies?
Okay. Let's take the third one from
the other. Relates to the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's, I think, 5% of the total greenhouse gas emissions are caused by technologies, or the new technologies. And you said, yeah, I mean, you're aware of this trade-off, and you raised the question of how to deal with it. So which projects to do and which not to do. You raised the question. I would be really interested in getting an answer of how to decide whether and to which degree to use it, or maybe not.
It is sort of like all of these questions are questions of, I would say, of my lifetime. At least that's what I want to try to answer in the next whatever many years I have sort of left. So these are very, very difficult questions. So to the question of how do you decide the objective function or the utility function, and what's right or what's wrong, etc. So there are projects like someone you can look at the work of Iyad Rahwan at MIT, who's trying to encode ethical rules in driverless cars. So it's like the human in the loop kind of argument, or societies in the loop, where he asks people, he crowdsources, if you are a driverless car, you have this choice. You have to kill a 40-year-old male or a child. Which one, as a human, would you choose to kill? Okay, and so he crowdsources that, and then he encodes these moral values into the cars. But more broadly, there is hardly ever any right or wrong, right? I mean, it's very cultural, it's very contextual. So I think, but this notion of human in the loop is, I think, central. Is that we have to be in control of what these machines do. And it gets to the other question about sometimes there are unintended consequences. Algorithms can be black boxes and you don't really know how they work, but you can still be in control. I'll get back to the question about this question of flip side, in particular about biases and discriminations, for example. But another small, let's say, foray into that we're doing is for the Opal project. It's not just a tech platform that extracts indicators. We have put in place something that is called a code, and it's a play on word. And the code acronym stands for Council for the Orientation of Development and Ethics. So it sounds very UN-y, kind of, bureaucracy-ish, etc. But it's basically a group of people in Colombia and Senegal that actually give insights on the use cases, on the indicators. They not only say, don't do that, but they also say, look at this problem. Like, education is a big problem in our country. And so the indicators and the use cases should be especially relevant to this question. So we are at the very, very beginning, but at least it's those kinds of principles and very small projects that I think are the right path. And so flip sides, yes, there are thousands of flip sides. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. Maybe in 10 years or in 20 years, I will look back at what I've said today and think this is crazy. This whole thing about human AI, we should just unplug everything, stop having computers, stop doing, and I'm serious. Maybe I will have learned that that is the last point about so this trade-off, etc. First of all, you can decide not to attend some conferences, or that's one possibility. of course, like video, etc., is going to get better. Now it's very frustrating. You can't, have you tried to have a, yes, you have, to have a phone call on Skype, you lose your mind, right? Like, can you hear me? Like, I can't hear you, etc. And there is also the notion of data minimization, which I think is key, is that we, I think, collect and keep way too many data or too much data. And so I think there will be the right to be forgotten, and something like Opal is about almost like real time or like a short period of time. So this idea, this trend of keeping and storing more and more and more data is I think going to be recognized as being completely unsustainable.
I've got a very basic question. So as a researcher, how do you actually define big data in social sciences? For example, does it depend upon the size or the extent of coverage? So what is the minimum level of data you actually require to say that it's a big data in research? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll try to answer in 90 seconds. So first, there is no single definition of big data. I have defined it in some papers. I use is because I don't think of big data as large data sets. I think of big data as a singular term for a phenomenon. The same way you would say open data is, you don't say open data are. So I say big data is, what is it? It's a movement. It's an ecosystem. It's a phenomenon that is made up of new kinds of data. So it's not about size, really. It's about the fact that these are like from uncontrolled processes. So they are like exhaust data to a large extent. Okay, so as opposed to controlled processes like censuses and surveys and things like that. So it's a qualitative difference. And then what makes big data what it is, like a phenomenon, etc., is also the capacities around it. So machine learning, cloud computing, etc., etc. And then it's the ecosystem of actors. The fact that you have to work with Vodafone, with Orange, with Facebook, with Google, that to me is what makes big data big data. So it's really not about the size of the data. And then I would say last, and this will be my last word, yes, it is scary. It is scary, and we can talk about, and I'm French as you can, yes, I'm very cognizant of the risks of surveillance, the imbalance of power. And I'm a demographer, so I'm not a computer scientist coming out, this is going to fix the world. But if we look at the state of the world, like I was talking to Marcus, like we didn't wait for AI for example, the American justice system to be extremely discriminatory. Like we are all biased. We have very strong imbalance of power in our societies. So saying, oh, this is going to be horrible, etc. Well, the world is pretty horrible to start with. And so maybe we can actually I think if we are more better informed, more data driven, in a cautious way, but in a systematic way, I think the world could actually get better. At least that's my hope.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel Letouzé.